The Galactic Enforcement Station Iron Talon hung in space like a monument to bureaucratic overconfidence. All sharp angles and flickering lights that made you wonder if someone had crossed a medieval fortress with a space station and then forgotten to hire competent electricians, which, frankly, wasn't far from the truth. Commander Graxis stood in the observation deck, his 6 arms folded in what he believed was an intimidating display of authority. The purple-scaled Zephyrian had spent the better part of 3 decades climbing the ranks of galactic enforcement, and today, oh, today was going to be special. Today, he was going to show the entire galaxy exactly why humans were nothing more than clever apes with delusions of grandeur. "Sir," Lieutenant Nightwhisper purred from behind him, her feline features arranged in what passed for a smile among the Nexari. "The human shuttle has docked." "Ambassador Wren, I believe her designation is?" Graxis turned, his scaled lips curling into something that might charitably be called a grin. "Excellent. And our sensors confirm the biological weapons aboard her vessel?" "Well," Nightwhisper's ears twitched. "The readings are unusual. The computer keeps classifying the life form as both extremely dangerous and requires immediate cuddles. Our tech teams are baffled. The station's AI chose that moment to chime in with all the enthusiasm of a customer service representative on their last day before retirement. Attention all personnel. We are now at threat level orange. Please note that threat level orange means mildly concerned but not concerned enough to actually do anything about it. Also, the coffee machine in Sector 5 is still broken. Maintenance requests have been filed. They will continue to be ignored." Graxis ignored the AI's editorial commentary. He'd been trying to get the system's personality matrix replaced for months, but apparently sarcastic and unhelpful was considered a feature, not a bug. Instead, he focused on the tactical display showing the approaching human. Ambassador Wren didn't look like much through the grainy security feeds. Average height for a human, brown hair pulled back in what his cultural database unhelpfully labeled as a practical bun. Wearing simple diplomatic attire that screamed, "I come in peace, please don't shoot." But Graxis had done his homework. Humans were deceptive creatures, after all. They'd somehow convinced half the galaxy that they were a peaceful species, when their own history was nothing but warfare, conquest, and an alarming tendency to domesticate things that should have eaten them. "Sir?" Nightwhisper's voice carried a note of confusion. "The human is requesting permission to bring her offspring to the diplomatic meeting." "Her what now?" Graxis's middle pair of arms unfolded in surprise. "Apparently, she has a child with her. The translation matrix is having difficulty. It keeps alternating between adorable family, member, pack bonding experiment, and small but efficient killing machine." The AI's voice crackled over the intercom again. "Update. Biological analysis complete. The life form aboard the human vessel is classified as a juvenile Vorthak. For those keeping score at home, that's the same species that wiped out 3 enforcement patrols last year before we managed to diplomatically relocate their entire planet. Current threat assessment: fluffy, but homicidal." Graxis felt all 6 of his arms tingle with anticipation. This was perfect. This was exactly what he'd been waiting for. Here was a human, a species that insisted on their peaceful intentions, traveling with one of the galaxy's most notorious apex predators. And not just any Vorthak, but a juvenile one. Everyone knew that young predators were the most dangerous, all instinct and no restraint. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice carrying the sort of authority that came from never having been wrong about anything important, prepare the combat training demonstration. Night Whisper's ears perked up. Sir? The Scaleth Cubs? The Scaleth Cubs. Graxus's grin widened, revealing rows of teeth that had evolved specifically for looking intimidating during moments like this. If this human wants to bring a baby apex predator to a diplomatic meeting, then perhaps it's time we showed her exactly what galactic enforcement thinks of such provocative behavior. The Scaleth Cubs were the station's pride and joy, if by pride and joy you meant barely contained nightmare fuel. Rescued from a smuggling operation 6 months ago, the dozen juvenile predators had been housed in the station's rehabilitation center, a facility that looked suspiciously like a high-security zoo. Each cub stood about waist-high to a human, with the general appearance of a velociraptor that had been crossed with a chainsaw and given opposable thumbs. Their natural weapons, claws, teeth, and an unfortunate tendency to hunt in coordinated packs, had made them ideal subjects for Graxus's new combat training protocols. Sir, Night Whisper said, her voice carrying the sort of careful tone that suggested she was about to say something her superior officer didn't want to hear. Are we certain this is diplomatically appropriate? Diplomatically appropriate? Graxus waved 4 arms dismissively. Lieutenant, we are dealing with a species that has somehow convinced the galaxy they're peaceful while simultaneously adopting every dangerous predator they encounter. This human shows up with a Vorthak cub and expects us to just… What? Serve tea and discuss trade agreements? Number. Today we demonstrate exactly why galactic enforcement maintains order in this galaxy. The AI's voice drifted through the speakers with all the enthusiasm of a funeral director. Attention, all personnel. Commander Graxus has authorized the release of the Scaleth Cubs for what he is calling a diplomatic demonstration. For those of you with families, now would be an excellent time to update your wills. The station's legal department reminds everyone that death by mauling is not covered under standard health insurance. Through the observation windows, Graxus could see the human shuttle settling into the docking bay. The boarding tube extended with a pneumatic hiss that sounded suspiciously like the station sighing in resignation. Within moments, the airlock cycled, and Ambassador Wren stepped aboard Iron Talon. She looked exactly as unremarkable as the security feeds had suggested. Medium height, brown hair, wearing a simple gray diplomatic uniform that managed to be both professional and completely non-threatening. She moved with the sort of easy confidence that suggested she was either very brave or very stupid, though in Graxus's experience, there wasn't much difference between the two when it came to humans. Behind her came the Vorthak cub. Graxus had seen plenty of Vorthak in his career, usually right before they tried to tear his face off. But this one was different. For starters, it was small, no bigger than a human child, which made sense since it was, according to the files, only 8 standard years old. Its fur was a soft silver-gray color, and its ears twitched with curiosity rather than predatory focus. When it looked around the docking bay, its eyes held not the cold calculation of a born killer, but the wide-eyed wonder of a child seeing something new and exciting. "Wow, Mom," the little Vorthak said in perfect galactic standard, her voice carrying the sort of breathless excitement that only children could manage. "This place is huge. Is that really a 0G playground? Can we go there after your meeting?" Ambassador Wren smiled. Not the diplomatic smile that humans used when they were pretending to be friendly, but the sort of genuine, warm expression that spoke of actual affection. "We'll see, sweetie. Remember what we talked about. Best behavior while Mama works." The child because that's what she was, Graxus realized with growing confusion. Just a child who happened to belong to a species of apex predators, nodded solemnly. "I'll be good. I brought my tablet and headphones. Can I watch the ship's dock?" "Of course, Cleo. Just stay close, okay?" Graxus felt his certainty wavering for just a moment. This wasn't what he'd expected. Where was the snarling predator? Where was the barely contained violence that every Vorthak exhibited? This creature, this Cleo, was acting like, well, like a normal child. But then his tactical training kicked in. Humans were known for their deception. This was obviously some sort of psychological warfare, designed to make galactic enforcement lower their guard. Well, Commander Graxus hadn't gotten where he was by falling for such obvious tricks. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice carrying newfound resolve, "initiate Protocol Omega-6. It's time to show our guests exactly what happens when apex predators meet superior. Training and equipment." Night Whisper's ears flattened against her skull. "Sir, perhaps we should—" "That's an order, Lieutenant." The AI's voice filled the docking bay with all the warmth of a tax audit. "Attention Ambassador Wren and accompanying small but theoretically dangerous life form. Welcome to Iron Talon Station, where your safety is our primary concern. And by primary concern we mean something we think about occasionally between coffee breaks. Please proceed to Conference Room Alpha 3 for your diplomatic meeting. Try not to bleed on the carpets, they were just cleaned." As Wren and Cleo made their way through the corridors, followed by an escort of nervous security officers who kept their hands conspicuously close to their weapons, Graxus activated the station's internal communication system. "All combat personnel to Sector 5. Repeat, all combat personnel to Sector 5. Prepare the Scaleth Cubs for immediate deployment. Today, we demonstrate why galactic enforcement protocols exist, and why some species should think twice before bringing apex predators to diplomatic meetings." The AI's commentary followed them through the corridors. Current station status: moderately panicked. Threat assessment has been upgraded from orange to beige, a color that doesn't officially exist, but adequately describes the current level of confused anxiety permeating the station. The betting pool on whether anyone survives the next hour is now open. Current odds favor the small child. Ambassador Wren seemed completely oblivious to the growing tension around her. She walked with the easy stride of someone who had nothing to fear, occasionally pointing out interesting architectural features to Cleo, who responded with the sort of enthusiastic observations that only children could manage. "Look, Mom! That wall panel is blinking. Is it supposed to do that?" "I don't think so, sweetie. Sometimes old machines get a little cranky, like Grandpa Joe's hover chair." Exactly like Grandpa Joe's hover chair. Graxus watched the exchange through the security monitors, his confusion growing by the minute. This wasn't how apex predators were supposed to behave. Where was the territorial aggression? Where was the pack mentality that had made the Vorthak such a threat? This child was acting like, well, like a child. But Commander Graxus hadn't gotten where he was by second-guessing himself. Humans were devious creatures, and this was obviously some sort of elaborate deception. The moment they reached the conference room, he would spring his trap. The Scaleth Cubs would demonstrate exactly what happened when real predators encountered proper military training and superior equipment. What could possibly go wrong? The AI's final announcement echoed through the station with the resignation of a computer that had seen far too much. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted life forms, please stand by for what Commander Graxus assures me will be a diplomatic Demonstration of unprecedented effectiveness. Medical personnel are standing by. The station's insurance company has been notified. Next of kin notifications are ready for immediate transmission. Enjoy the show. Conference Room Alpha 3 had been designed by someone who clearly believed that diplomacy worked best when everyone involved felt vaguely uncomfortable. The lighting was just a shade too dim. The chairs were just a fraction too small for most species, and the table had been polished to such a high shine that it reflected everyone's worst angles. It was, in other words, the perfect venue for what Commander Graas had planned. Wren settled into her chair with the sort of practiced ease that suggested she'd attended far too many uncomfortable diplomatic meetings. Cleo, meanwhile, had claimed the chair next to her, and was already engrossed in her tablet, occasionally making small sounds of delight at whatever she was watching. The security escort arranged themselves around the room like decorative potted plants, if potted plants carried pulse rifles and looked perpetually nervous. "Ambassador Wren?" Graas began, his voice carrying the sort of formal authority that he'd practiced in front of mirrors. "Welcome to Iron Talon Station. I trust your journey was uneventful?" "Quite pleasant, thank you," Wren replied with a smile that seemed genuinely warm. "Though I have to say, your docking procedures are remarkably thorough. I haven't been scanned that many times since I tried to bring a fruit basket through customs on Rigel Prime." The AI's voice drifted through the room's speakers with the enthusiasm of a weather report. For the record, Ambassador Wren's fruit basket contained 3 varieties of explosive berries and a carnivorous pineapple. Rigel Prime customs officials are still receiving therapy. Graas ignored the editorial commentary and gestured toward Cleo with 2 of his 6 arms. "And this is the companion you've brought with you?" "This is my daughter, Cleo," Wren said, her voice carrying the sort of protective warmth that parents used when discussing their children. "Cleo, can you say hello to Commander Graas?" Cleo looked up from her tablet, and Graas found himself staring into eyes that were large, curious, and completely lacking in the predatory gleam he'd expected. "Hello, Commander Graas. Your station is really cool. Do you really have a 0G playground? Mom said we might be able to visit it if I'm good during the meeting." Yes, we do have recreational facilities." Graas found himself momentarily thrown off balance. This wasn't going according to plan. The child was supposed to be displaying aggressive behavior, territorial instincts, something that would justify what he was about to do. Instead, she was acting like a normal child. "That's awesome! I've never been on a real space station before. Mom and I usually just visit planets. Oh, and thank you for having us. Mom always says it's important to be polite to our hosts." Lieutenant Night Whisper, who had been standing near the door looking increasingly uncomfortable, cleared her throat. "Sir, the demonstration personnel are in position." Graas straightened, his confidence returning. Yes, this was why he'd planned the demonstration. Humans were masters of deception, and this apparent innocence was obviously just another layer of their psychological warfare. Well, he wouldn't be fooled. "Excellent. Ambassador Wren, before we proceed with our trade discussions, I thought you might be interested in a small demonstration of our training protocols here on Iron Talon." Wren raised an eyebrow. "Training protocols?" "Indeed. You see, we've recently implemented a new program for rehabilitating, challenging species. Given that you've chosen to bring a Vorthak to our station, I thought you might appreciate seeing how we handle apex predators." The temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. Wren's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. A subtle straightening that suggested she was suddenly paying very close attention. "Commander," she said, her voice still diplomatically pleasant. "Cleo is my daughter. She's 8 years old. I'm not sure what sort of demonstration you think is appropriate, but—" "Oh, I think you'll find it quite educational." Graxus activated his communicator with a flourish. "Release the subjects." The AI's voice filled the room with the sort of resigned professionalism usually reserved for announcing natural disasters. "Attention all personnel. The Scaleth Cubs have been released into Corridor 7 with full combat equipment. Evacuation routes are clearly marked. The station's insurance company has been notified." Again. They were not pleased. Through the conference room's reinforced windows, the first signs of chaos became visible. Station personnel were running, not walking, running, in various directions, their faces displaying the sort of panic usually reserved for hull breaches or tax audits. Emergency lights began flashing in patterns that somehow managed to be both urgent and vaguely festive. "Commander," Wren said, her voice carrying a note of warning, "what exactly have you released?" 12 juvenile Scaleth, Graxus replied with obvious pride. "Apex predators from the Andorian system, each one equipped with military-grade energy blades and trained in basic combat protocols. They're being guided toward this section of the station by our tactical team." Cleo looked up from her tablet, her ears twitching with interest. "Scaleth? Are those the lizard bird things with the really sharp claws? I read about them in my xenobiology book. They hunt in packs and can run really fast." "That's right, little predator," Graxus said, his voice dripping with condescension. "And now you get to see how real apex predators handle themselves when properly trained and equipped." Through the corridor outside, the sound of approaching chaos grew louder. The distinctive chittering of Scaleth cubs echoed off the walls, punctuated by the occasional crash of something expensive being destroyed and the distant screams of fleeing personnel. "Mom?" Cleo's voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Why do the lizard birds have swords?" "That's a very good question, sweetie." Wren's voice remained calm, but her eyes had fixed on Commander Graxus with the sort of intensity that made smart people reconsider their life choices. "Commander, you've armed a pack of juvenile predators and released them on your own station, with weapons, toward a section containing civilians." "They're completely under control," Graxus insisted, though his voice carried slightly less confidence than it had moments before. "Our tactical team is monitoring their every move. This is merely a demonstration of proper containment and training protocols. The AI chose that moment to provide an update. Tactical Team Alpha reports that the Scaleth Cubs have, and I quote, gone completely off script and are now hunting maintenance robots for sport. Team Beta reports that they are, quote, not getting paid enough for this nonsense and have requested immediate transfer to less dangerous assignments, such as defusing unexploded ordnance or negotiating with tax collectors. Through the reinforced windows, the first Scaleth cub came into view. It was about the size of a large dog, covered in iridescent scales that shifted between green and blue as it moved. Its head was distinctly reptilian, but its body structure was more avian, built for speed and agility. In its clawed hands, it carried an energy blade that hummed with barely contained power. The cub paused in the corridor, its head turning as it scanned the area with the sort of focused intensity that spoke of a born hunter. When its gaze fell on the conference room's windows, its eyes, large, intelligent, and completely without mercy, locked onto the occupants inside. "Oh," Cleo said, her voice small and worried. "They look angry." "Nonsense," Graxus declared, though his own voice had risen in pitch. "They're simply focused. This is exactly what proper military training produces in apex predator species. The first Scaleth cub was joined by a second, then a third. Within moments, the entire pack had gathered in the corridor outside the conference room. 12 juvenile predators, each armed with a weapon capable of cutting through reinforced steel, each staring at the occupants of the conference room with the sort of predatory focus that had made their species the terror of 3-star systems. "Commander," Lieutenant Nightwhisper said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic, "perhaps we should consider activating the emergency containment protocols." "Absolutely not," Graxus snapped. "This is proceeding exactly as planned. The subjects are simply assessing the situation." The AI's commentary continued with the sort of cheerful helpfulness that made everyone want to find its personality matrix and reprogram it. Update from Tactical Command. The Scaleth Cubs have apparently decided that energy blades are insufficient for their needs and have begun fashioning improvised weapons from station furniture. Medical reports indicate that chair sword wounds heal differently than regular sword wounds. The more you know. The pack leader, a slightly larger cub with distinctive silver markings along its crest, stepped closer to the reinforced window. Its energy blade hummed as it traced patterns in the air, testing the weapon's weight and balance. When it looked directly at Cleo, something shifted in its posture. "Mom," Cleo whispered, shrinking back in her chair. "I think they want to hunt me." Ren's expression hardened. When she spoke, her voice carried the sort of quiet authority that made smart people pay attention and stupid people reconsider their life choices. "Commander Graxus, you have 30 seconds to explain why you thought it was appropriate to threaten my daughter with armed predators during a diplomatic meeting." "Threaten?" Graxus's voice cracked slightly. "This is merely a demonstration, a controlled exhibition of proper military protocols. The subjects are perfectly contained." As if summoned by his words, the pack leader's energy blade flared brighter. The reinforced window, designed to withstand everything from micrometeorites to small explosions, began to smoke where the blade's energy field touched it. "Oh," the AI observed with the sort of academic interest usually reserved for watching particularly interesting chemical reactions. "That's not supposed to happen. The reinforced transparent aluminum should be completely resistant to energy blade cutting. Unless, of course, the blades have been modified to military-grade specifications, which would be a violation of approximately 18 different safety protocols. But who's counting?" The smoking intensified. Through the growing haze, the pack of Scaleth cubs pressed closer, their weapons raised and their hunting instincts fully engaged. The pack leader's blade was now cutting a steady line through the supposedly impenetrable barrier. "Mom," Cleo said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared." And that, Commander Graxus realized with growing horror, was the moment everything went completely and irrevocably wrong. The AI's final announcement for this section carried all the enthusiasm of a customer service representative during a system crash. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted life forms currently questioning their career choices. The reinforced barriers are failing. Evacuation protocols are now in effect. Please proceed in an orderly fashion to the nearest exit, unless you're currently trapped in a conference room with armed juvenile predators trying to break in which case, well, it was nice knowing you." The energy blade broke through. The energy blade carved through the reinforced transparent aluminum like a hot knife through butter. If butter were designed to stop small explosions, and butter cost more than most planets' annual defense budgets. The pack leader's silver crest flared as it widened the breach, its intelligent eyes never leaving Cleo's frightened face. The remaining 11 Scalith cubs pressed closer, their own weapons humming with anticipation. They moved with the fluid coordination of a species that had evolved to hunt in packs, each one instinctively taking position to cut off escape routes that didn't actually exist. The conference room, which had been designed to contain diplomatic tensions, was proving woefully inadequate for containing actual apex predators with military hardware. "This is fine," Commander Graxis announced to no one in particular, his voice climbing toward frequencies that only small mammals could hear. "Everything is proceeding according to plan. The subjects are simply investigating the containment barriers." Lieutenant Night Whisper had pressed herself against the far wall, her feline instincts screaming at her to either fight or flee. Preferably flee, possibly to another galaxy. "Sir," she managed through gritted teeth, "perhaps this would be an excellent time to activate the emergency containment protocols." "Negative," Graxis replied, though sweat was beginning to bead on his scaled forehead. "We cannot show weakness in front of the human delegation. This is merely a temporary adjustment to the demonstration parameters." The AI's voice crackled through the speakers with the sort of helpful commentary that made everyone question the wisdom of creating artificial intelligence in the first place. Update from engineering. The containment barriers were designed to keep things out, not in. This design philosophy is now being questioned by several committee members, assuming any of them survive the next few minutes. Also, the coffee machine in Sector 5 is still broken. Priorities, people. The breach in the window widened. The pack leader squeezed through first, its energy blade casting eerie patterns of light across the conference room's polished surfaces. The moment its claws touched the floor, every other Scalith cub began chittering excitedly in their native language, a sound that roughly translated to, "Finally, something interesting to kill." Cleo had gone very still in her chair, the way small prey animals do when they realize they've been spotted by something with too many teeth. Her tablet slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor, the cheerful sounds of whatever children's program she'd been watching providing a surreal soundtrack to the unfolding nightmare. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're coming for me, aren't they?" Ren's jaw tightened. Throughout the escalating chaos, she'd maintained her diplomatic composure, with the sort of professional calm that came from years of practice at not strangling incompetent officials. But something had shifted in her posture, a subtle change that suggested the diplomat was giving way to something else entirely. "Commander," she said, her voice carrying the sort of quiet authority that made smart people pay attention and stupid people wonder why they suddenly felt the need to update their wills. "Call off your demonstration. Now." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Graxis replied, though his voice carried all the confidence of a man trying to convince himself that the building wasn't actually on fire. "The subjects need to complete their behavioral assessment. It's part of the protocol." The second Scalith cub squeezed through the breach, followed immediately by a third. They spread out across the conference room with practiced efficiency, their movements coordinated by instincts honed over millions of years of evolution. The pack leader approached Cleo's chair, its energy blade held in a grip that spoke of countless hours of combat training. This was the moment Commander Graxis had planned for. This was where the human's deception would be revealed, where the innocent child would shed her disguise and show her true predatory nature. This was where galactic enforcement would demonstrate why they maintained order in a galaxy full of dangerous species. Instead, Cleo pressed herself deeper into her chair and began to cry. Not the strategic tears of a manipulative predator, not the rage-filled howls of a cornered apex hunter, just the quiet, frightened sobs of a child who didn't understand why the adults were letting scary things with swords get close to her. "Please," she whispered, looking up at the approaching pack leader with wide, terrified eyes. "I don't want to fight. I just want to go home." The pack leader paused, its head tilting slightly as if confused by this response. In its experience, cornered prey either fought or fled. They didn't sit still and make sad noises. This was unprecedented. The other cubs began to close in, forming a circle around Cleo's chair. Their energy blades hummed in harmony, creating a sound like a mechanical choir singing a song about impending doom. The pack leader raised its weapon, the blade's energy field casting shifting shadows across Cleo's tear-streaked face. And that was when Ambassador Wren simply raised her right hand. Not dramatically, not threateningly, not with any sort of grand gesture or accompanying declaration. She just lifted her hand, palm out, fingers slightly spread, in the sort of casual motion someone might use to ask a question in class or hail a taxi on a busy street. The effect was immediate and impossible. Every single Scaleth cub stopped moving. Not slowed down, not hesitated. Stopped. Completely. As if someone had pressed a pause button on reality itself. The pack leader's energy blade, which had been mere inches from Cleo's face, remained frozen in mid-swing. The other cubs maintained their hunting positions like living statues, their weapons humming softly in the sudden silence. For a moment that stretched into eternity, nothing moved except the gentle rise and fall of breathing and the nervous twitching of Lieutenant Night Whisper's tail. Then, as if responding to some signal that only they could perceive, every Scaleth cub simultaneously opened their clawed hands. 12 energy blades clattered to the conference room floor in perfect unison, their humming cutting off abruptly as they deactivated. The weapons lay scattered across the polished surface like discarded toys, their military-grade cutting edges suddenly as threatening as butter knives at a dinner party. "What?" Commander Graxus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "In the name of the galactic core just happened?" The AI's response carried all the bewilderment of a computer trying to process data that violated every known law of physics. Sensor analysis indicates, well, sensors indicate that nothing happened. No energy discharges, no electromagnetic pulses, no psionic emanations, no quantum fluctuations, no temporal distortions, and definitely no magic. Because magic isn't real, and I refuse to acknowledge evidence to the contrary. Current hypothesis: mass hallucination brought on by stress and poor ventilation. But the impossible wasn't finished yet. The pack leader, the same apex predator that had been seconds away from demonstrating why its species had terrorized 3 star systems, looked down at its empty hands with what could only be described as confusion. Then it looked at Cleo, who was still pressed back in her chair, tears still streaming down her face. And then it did something that made Commander Graxus question everything he thought he knew about the universe. It sat down. Not in the controlled, alert posture of a predator maintaining tactical awareness. It sat down the way a large dog might sit. Haunches on the floor, front legs straight, head tilted slightly to one side in an expression of curious concern. The other 11 cubs followed suit, arranging themselves in a perfect circle around Cleo's chair. Within moments, what had been a coordinated pack of armed hunters had become something that looked disturbingly like a group therapy session. "Mom?" Cleo's voice was small and confused. "Why did they stop trying to hunt me?" Wren lowered her hand slowly, her expression as bewildered as everyone else's. I honestly don't know, sweetie." The pack leader made a soft sound, not the predatory chitter of a hunting scaleth, but something closer to a concerned whine. It scooted closer to Cleo's chair, moving with the careful deliberation of someone trying not to startle a frightened animal. When it was within arm's reach, it did something that made the AI's processors emit a sound suspiciously like a sob of electronic confusion. It rolled over and exposed its belly. "Okay," Lieutenant Night Whisper said, her voice pitched high enough to shatter crystal. "I'm officially requesting a transfer to anywhere else in the galaxy. Preferably somewhere that makes sense." Commander Graxus stared at the scene before him, a human child surrounded by apex predators who were behaving like oversized puppies seeking reassurance, and felt his understanding of the universe crumble like a poorly constructed house of cards in a hurricane. This, he announced to no one in particular, was not in the tactical manual. The AI's final observation for this section carried all the resignation of a computer that had officially given up on understanding anything. Current status: confused. Tactical assessment: impossible. Threat level: adorable. Medical update: 3 security personnel have fainted, 2 engineers are requesting psychological evaluation, and someone in the cafeteria is making stress-eating sounds that are concerning the health department. Also, the coffee machine is still broken, but honestly, that seems like the least of our problems right now. Wren knelt down beside her chair, bringing herself to eye level with the pack leader. The massive predator, which moments ago had been ready to demonstrate why its species had earned a galaxy-wide reputation for efficient murder, was now making soft, almost musical sounds while wiggling on its back like an oversized puppy. "It's okay," she said softly, reaching out to scratch the exposed belly scales. "Nobody's going to hurt you." The pack leader's response was immediate and impossible. It began to purr, not the threatening rumble of a satisfied predator, but the contented sound of a creature that had found exactly where it belonged. Commander Graxus watched this exchange with the sort of expression usually reserved for witnessing the fundamental laws of physics taking a coffee break. "Ambassador," he said, his voice climbing toward frequencies that made Lieutenant Night Whisper's ears hurt. "What in the name of the galactic core are you doing to my apex predators?" Wren looked up from where she was now surrounded by 11 scaleth cubs, each one vying for attention with the enthusiasm of oversized, scaly dogs. "I'm not doing anything to them, Commander. They're just responding." Responding to what? To being recognized as what they actually are. Wren's voice carried the sort of patient tone that teachers used when explaining something obvious to particularly slow students. "They're children, Commander. Babies, separated from their families, kept in captivity, and trained to fight. They're not monsters. They're traumatized kids." The AI's voice drifted through the speakers with the sort of philosophical wonder usually reserved for discovering new forms of mathematics. Accessing xenobiological databases, cross-referencing behavioral patterns, running psychological profiles. Oh my, that's actually quite obvious once you think about it. Note to self: recommend sensitivity training for all tactical personnel. Also, possibly therapy. Cleo had stopped crying and was now staring in fascination as one of the cubs, a smaller one with distinctive blue markings, had claimed her lap and was making the same purring sounds as the pack leader. "Mom," she whispered, "why are they acting like this?" "Because, sweetie," Wren said, gently stroking the head of the nearest cub, "your mama used to do this for a living, before she became a diplomat. I specialized in rehabilitation therapy for displaced apex predator species. These little ones recognize that." Commander Graxus felt his worldview crumble a little more. "But But the tactical reports said Scaleth cubs were impossible to domesticate, completely resistant to behavioral modification. They're not resistant to behavioral modification, Wren replied, now with 3 cubs competing for space in her immediate vicinity. They're resistant to being treated like weapons instead of children. There's a difference. The pack leader had managed to roll back onto its feet and was now investigating Cleo with the sort of gentle curiosity that suggested it had never seen anything quite like her before. When it touched her arm with one clawed finger, carefully, almost reverently, Cleo giggled. "He's tickling me." "She," Wren corrected gently. "And she's probably never met a Vorthak before. Your species are from completely different sectors. Can I pet her?" "Ask her first." Politely. Cleo looked solemnly at the pack leader. "Excuse me, Miss Scaleth, but would it be okay if I petted you?" "I promise to be gentle." The pack leader's response was to lower her head and make a sound that needed no translation. Within moments, Cleo was giggling as scaled faces nuzzled against her, and the conference room had transformed from a tactical demonstration gone wrong into something that looked suspiciously like an interspecies playdate. "This is impossible," Graxus muttered. "Humans are supposed to be weak, prey species. You're not apex predators. You're barely evolved primates with delusions of grandeur." Wren looked up from where she was now completely surrounded by purring Scaleth cubs, her expression carrying the sort of gentle amusement reserved for correcting fundamental misunderstandings. "Commander, you're absolutely right. Humans aren't apex predators." "Finally! Someone who—" "We're something much more dangerous than that." The room fell silent, except for the contented purring of a dozen former weapons of mass destruction. "We're pack integrators," Wren continued, her voice carrying the sort of quiet authority that made people listen whether they wanted to or not. "We didn't survive on Earth by being the strongest, or the fastest, or the most dangerous. We survived by making friends with everything that was stronger and faster and more dangerous than us. We turned wolves into dogs, wildcats into companions, and apex predators into partners. It's what we do." The AI's commentary carried a note of dawning realization. Cross-referencing human historical data. Oh no. They domesticated everything, literally everything. There are reports of humans attempting to domesticate black holes. The application was denied, but only due to technical limitations. The mining corporation that destroyed Cleo's homeworld, Wren said, her voice hardening slightly, they weren't afraid of the Vorthak because they were dangerous. They were afraid because humans had started adopting Vorthak children. They knew what would happen if humanity started integrating an entire species of natural-born engineers with retractable claws. Commander Graxus stared at the scene before him, his station's most dangerous captives now behaving like an enthusiastic petting zoo, and felt the last of his certainty evaporate. "So, what happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Wren smiled, and for the first time since boarding the station, it was the sort of smile that hinted at exactly why she'd been chosen as an ambassador. "Now, Commander, we discuss those trade agreements. But first, I think these children need proper accommodations. They've been in captivity long enough." The AI's final announcement carried all the resignation of a computer that had officially given up on understanding the universe. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted life forms currently questioning everything they thought they knew about galactic power structures, Iron Talon Station has apparently been converted into an impromptu daycare center. Medical personnel report that confused but heartwarming is not an official medical condition, but they're considering adding it to the books. The betting pool on survival has been replaced with a betting pool on who's going to volunteer for permanent childcare duty. Current odds favor everyone. Through the conference room windows, other dangerous species from the rehabilitation center could be seen approaching, drawn by sounds they instinctively recognized as safety, acceptance, and the promise of belonging. A pack of Thoraxian wolf analogues padded down the corridor, followed by what appeared to be a family of crystalline spider creatures that clicked musically as they moved. Lieutenant Nightwhisper watched the approaching menagerie with the sort of expression usually reserved for watching one's career prospects evaporate in real time. "Sir," she said weakly, "I think we're about to be overrun by every dangerous species in our containment facility." "Overrun is such a negative term," Wren said cheerfully, now with Cleo perched on her shoulders, while scaleth cubs arranged themselves around her feet like scaled purring furniture. "I prefer to think of it as spontaneous integration event." The first Thoraxian wolf analog poked its head through the breach in the conference room window, took one look at the scene inside, and immediately began making the sort of happy whining sounds that transcended species barriers. Within minutes, the conference room had transformed into something that resembled a cross between a diplomatic summit and the galaxy's most unusual family reunion. Commander Graas stood in the middle of it all, watching apex predators from across the galaxy competing for head scratches from a human diplomat and her 8-year-old daughter. His tactical training had prepared him for many scenarios: hostile boarding actions, diplomatic incidents, even full-scale rebellions. It had not prepared him for the sight of a crystalline arachnid trying to figure out how to purr. "Ambassador," he said, his voice carrying the sort of defeated acceptance usually reserved for middle management during budget meetings, "I believe we need to discuss new housing arrangements for our former security risks." "I think that would be wise," Wren agreed, gently disentangling herself from what appeared to be a group hug involving at least 6 different species. "These children have been away from proper family structures for far too long." The AI's voice crackled through the speakers one final time, carrying all the philosophical weight of a computer that had just witnessed the fundamental nature of galactic politics being rewritten by the power of advanced snuggling. "Station log, final entry. Iron Talon has been successfully converted from a military installation to what can only be described as the galaxy's most heavily armed adoption center. Commander Graxus has submitted 17 different resignation letters in the past hour, all of which have been rejected on the grounds that someone needs to supervise the new daycare protocols. The coffee machine in Sector 5 remains broken, but frankly, I think we have bigger priorities now, such as figuring out how to install playground equipment in a space station." End log. Humanity, it turned out, hadn't conquered the galaxy through superior firepower. They'd done something far more terrifying. They'd decided to adopt it.